The excellent path for human beings. We can learn the course of humanity by using the body and mind as our scriptures, that is, to try and be aware while using the body and the mind. To study and watch, to know and see, by using the method of developing awareness as taught by Luangpor Teean Jidasubho, namely the rhythmic meditation of moving the arms, and the walking meditation. To intentionally make movements, in order to first see the body, which is coarse, and later on, to see the mind or to see thought, concocting things up. Let's compare developing awareness with a child learning how to write. When the teacher writes an A, or a B, on the blackboard, the child remembers it and can write it too. Studying and knowing about the body and the mind is similar. First, we have to train in awareness to see the body and mind clearly, then we will be able to use awareness well. We practice the rhythmic and walking meditation, in order to clearly know with awareness the movements of the body. When we see the movements of the body clearly, we will see the mind clearly also. We don't have to go and look for the mind, but we depend on watching the movements of the body, which will automatically take us to the movements of the mind. Keep watching the body all the time, try and watch with intention, acknowledge the feeling that arises at the time the body is moving, for example while doing the rhythmic and walking meditation. In one day, one can know many times. While being aware of the movements of the body, sometimes there may be many things that delude one, for example thoughts that arise unintentionally. Usually this happens when we're doing our best to develop awareness. Take it to be a lesson, an experience that comes to teach us something, to come back again to the body and re-establish awareness with the movements of the body. Delusion teaches us to not be deluded. For people who are peaceful by nature, it is easy to be aware and to have sati sampajanya. The practice of meditation places much importance on awareness, and always feeling oneself, realizing one's actions, because sati sampajanya is able to change what is bad into good, and what is wrong into right. One who is aware tends to do what is good, because awareness is the source of sila, samadhi, and panya. So, we find a method to study and understand our minds by watching both the body and the mind. When we are skilled at watching the body and mind with awareness, and we clearly understand the body and the mind, we will know what merit and evil is, and what religion means. We will come into contact with virtue, firmness of mind and wisdom. We don't just think about it, we experience it. This is a law of nature. Therefore, make effort to always watch and see the body, knowing and seeing it through the mind contacting it. It is just like a teacher writing something on the blackboard for the students to see. First we have to make an effort to watch. Determine to watch until you won't forget. Before, the A and the B were on the blackboard, but now, we contact the A and the B in our minds because we've paid attention. Watching the body and mind with sati compares with a computer that records information. When we put information in our minds by regularly training in watching and seeing, we evolve. This makes us see the body and mind as it really is. Understanding and knowledge about our bodies and minds will arise until the course of humanity is finished. This is called realization. Realization compares to stepping out of the darkness. We see our own minds and we don't get caught up in various manifestations. We see physical and mental things for what they are, we see the nature of both the body and the mind, and we see what kind of physical and mental manifestations there are, for example, heat, cold, like and dislike. If we don't see clearly, we yield to nama and rupa and their conditions, and we are under the power of proliferating thoughts. But when we are fully aware, we escape from that power. It is like solving a mathematical problem, one is able to do it when there is nothing hindering the mind. So, to come to understand the body and the mind is like finishing the basic course completely. Before, we used to be caught up with the conditions of mind. For example, being the one who is hot, when feeling hot, being the one who is cold, when feeling cold, being the one who is hungry, when feeling hungry, or being the one who endures pain, when feeling pain. We were the one who is caught up with all those manifestations. This is called to yield to conditions, letting them be the boss. When awareness arises, those things cannot be the boss any longer because we see that they are just conditions of the body and mind. Anger, for example, is a condition, it is not permanent and it doesn't have any essence. To see like this, is therefore comparable to the arising of a magic eye, that receives and knows the expressions of the body and the mind. The magic eye means, to be fully aware and to see that Rupa Dhamma, and Nama Dhamma, are subject to the three characteristics, of impermanence, valuelessness, and non-selfhood. Then, we're able to let go of body and mind. This is similar to not having a whole lot of rubbish scattered all over the place, as we did before. Whatever happens to the body and the mind, we throw all those conditions of body and mind into the three characteristics of anajjung, dukkung, and anatta. Before, we had lots of garbage which was a hassle, there were stains of suffering, stains of anger, of desire, of delusion, of love, of hatred, of heat, and cold. But now, we don't have all that rubbish anymore. It is merit to see impermanence or to see the three characteristics. Merit here, refers to seeing the conditions of body and mind, and to be able to use the body and mind in one's life, in the right way. Evil is to not know the conditions of body and mind, it is compared to darkness. Such a person is considered to be uncultivated, both the body and mind are undeveloped because one allows proliferation to be in charge. This makes one hold on to anger, lust, and delusion. Sometimes one lets anger be there for several days. When we clearly see and realize the body and the mind like this, we are no longer uncultivated, we are high-class people. Religions deal exclusively with people, they are teachings about the body and the mind. We all have a body and a mind. Both merit and evil can be found within us, in our actions. When we practice up to this point, Rupa and Nama, or the body and the mind, treat each other in the right way. Before, the body and the mind were oppressing each other all the time, for example when hot or cold feelings would arise in the body, the mind would suffer, or when anger would arise in the mind, the body would be uncomfortable. They would oppress each other all the time. But now, we see the body and the mind relating to each other in the right way, because awareness is there to watch them. When we know this much, we have a foundation in practice and we make continuous progress. It is similar to passing elementary school with good marks, and thus having the opportunity to study in high school. Having a foundation means that we're fluent in watching proliferation arising, this makes us see the concoction that's going on. When the state of seeing arises, we don't get carried away with the proliferation that arises. This seeing is an important principle because it is able to smelt and digest all of the defilements. This compares to studying well and being able to read and understand the meaning. From the state of continuously watching, we come to see convention and suffering. The state of watching gives rise to fluency, it is like having a good tool, it makes us proceed on the road of life all the time, and we don't get to a blind alley. Not seeing suffering, or the suffering connected with the body and the mind makes us grasp onto it, all of which is a burden. When we see clearly, some types of suffering drop off immediately because we see the world as being full of convention, some of it are material things, others are mental. Even language is convention, the world is full of it. It is called the conventional norm. In the past, I learned many superstitious chants, I used to sit and recite them at night. I had verses for making holy water, for going into the forest, for dressing, for eating, for leaving the house and for catching cows and buffaloes, for all of it. It was over the top. The happiness I got from it was little, if any. It is like a trader in kapok or fiber, he or she gets little money. In terms of merit, it is little merit and it is not lasting. But now, I'm no longer a trader in kapok or fiber, now I'm a trader in diamonds and I get loads of money. Seeing convention makes one able to completely give up on those verses. For example, the chants about the 108 virtuous qualities of the Buddha, belief in various ceremonies, invulnerability verses, which one has to recite until one feels that one becomes big and one's skin becomes tough. These things I have completely discarded. Instead, lightness of body and mind arose. I realized what convention is. Whatever somebody does, I understand it, whoever does right or wrong, I know. When I fell into the well of knowledge, I saw all things in the world as being full of objective matter, ultimate meaning, and changing conditions. I saw that all things have causes and are conditioned. For example, I saw that sometimes an object can be supposed as good, as bad, as likable, or as not likable. Ordinary people assume words like love, hate, like, dislike, beautiful, ugly, they take this person to be good and that person to be not good. This is all quite ordinary, but it makes one not free in seeing. This is called, knowing convention, the norm, and ultimate meaning. On knowing these things the mind is set free because the state of seeing clearly has arisen. Falling in the well of knowledge means to know in all postures and all movements, one knows while walking, while sitting, while seeing, while hearing, etc. This is called the arising of wisdom knowledge. It leads us out of the various problems. Seeing clearly supports our continuous progress, one comes to know what virtue is, what firmness of mind is, what wisdom is. One really makes contact with merit, it is not like before when we just had ideas about it. I can assure you that the mind that really experiences merit, doesn't fall in hell, is not a hungry ghost and is not a thick-headed demon because one knows what is right and wrong. To experience merit is therefore useful. To come into contact with evil teaches one to let go of it. It is similar to having stepped on a thorn, when we see thorns, we don't step on them as before. So, really making contact with merit is for the extinguishing of suffering, for peace, and for liberation. When we stay with virtue, we experience virtue, there is normality in both the body and the mind, the body is in its normal state and the mind is in order, the mind doesn't go up and down, it doesn't run wild. The state of normality of the body and mind is virtue, firmness of mind, and wisdom, thorough understanding, arising, which keeps purifying the mind and sets it free. Knowing the causes and conditions makes one not stupid, not deluded, and one is able to contact sila, samadhi, panya. This is called the training in virtue, it is the virtue that arises from the path of practice. The state of watching and then seeing, and having seen, not being caught up, is the genuine path to overcome suffering. When one watches continuously, the mind will be purified, it is the living of the spiritual life. This is the way to come in touch with virtue. Always stay with this state, it is the training in sila. It is the virtue that melts and eats up the corruptions of mind, and one is able to let go of evil, do what is good and purify the mind. It can be taken that the training in virtue is really advantageous. It is not the kind of virtue that one recites in a ceremony. Right now, in carrying on with one's life, one can find virtue. One is then someone with real virtue. Sila makes the body, speech, and mind normal. At this stage, we have really become a human being, and really closed the door to hell and the evil destinations, because we know the path, we know virtue, firmness of mind and wisdom through experience. It is not knowing through memory, thinking or figuring things out. Rather, we meet and see, we experience sila, samadhi and panya, we experience the noble path and the spiritual life, brahmacharya, which is purity. Before, it was as if there was more than one person inside, one person was the watcher, one person was the thinker, and the one who made movements was still another person. But now, in the state of watching, all three come together as one. The state of watching arises, when developing awareness with the movements of the rhythmic and walking meditation, it makes it easy to know and see the movements of the body and the mind, the concocting thoughts. In the past, proliferation would control us completely, and that would give rise to sleepiness, restlessness, doubts, etc. But with awareness, we are able to conquer proliferation, and those mind states no longer exist anymore. This compares to traveling on a highway. When we pass this town and that village, where do we get to and what is it like beyond there? Well, nobody has to tell us, we know, see, and experience that for ourselves, naturally. Next, one comes to know, see, and experience what angels are. Angels are people who are ashamed of doing anything that is evil. They don't dare to think evil thoughts, speak evil words, or do evil things. Before, I used to understand that angels were up in the clouds. I thought that there was a heaven up there. It's all right to believe that, but those angels cannot help us. The kind of angels that arise within us refer to having a sense of shame of wrongdoing. One doesn't dare to think, speak, or act in evil ways. One doesn't even dare to think. This is what angels are. Angels are within us, so we don't have to bow to them, we don't have to pray to them. I had never thought like this or known like this, and so I would like people to study and come to know it, to practice with it. One day, as I was doing walking meditation, I thought to myself, this person probably doesn't know, that person probably doesn't know. I thought about my parents, my relatives. I wanted them to do walking meditation, I wanted them to sit down and build up awareness. I thought with loving kindness and compassion, I wanted to help them. Walking on the excellent path makes us go beyond being a man or a woman, being a hungry ghost, a demon, or a devil. One becomes a human being, one who has a superior mind. Someone with virtue, who lives one's life according to the noble path. One abandons what is evil and does what is wholesome. One's mind is like that of the gods. One knows merit and evil, and one genuinely understands Buddhism. This is what the excellent path leads us to see and understand. Religion exists in people's very hearts if those people refrain from evil, perform only good actions, and their virtue is pure. But if one still thinks in evil ways, it can be taken that one hasn't reached Buddhism, even when one recites the words Buddhang, Dhammang, Sanghang, Saranang Gacchami, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Religions teach people not to have suffering, religions teach people to do good. If one is still suffering, one is not reckoned as one who has reached the religion. One's life might become blemished, it might go downhill. When we arrive at religion, we relinquish evil and do only what is right. This compares to someone who does certain things, until he or she makes a living with it and is stable in it. He or she is able to depend on it, in order to live his or her life. This is how we experience things. The state of watching and then seeing, and when seeing, not being caught up, is the most concise action. It is like the Dhamma is really in our fist, we don't have to do a lot. Before, I was in a mess, I clung to ceremonies, clung to others and believed in rituals. I was even afraid of my own thoughts, because with thoughts come doubt, fear, love, and hate. But when full awareness arose, I wasn't like that anymore because I determined to only just watch. It was as if my life came down to just doing that much. Studying and practicing until one reaches the state of watching and seeing, and not getting caught up, is the point of completeness, the point where all things come together. It is the diamond of the Dhamma, because one is able to smelt the fetters, 10 deep-rooted and subconscious tendencies in the mind. Seeing Rupa and Nama, seeing suffering, seeing convention and seeing the mind proliferating, gradually diminishes the ego. The mind gradually turns into one of a human being, which means that there is morality as a refuge. The way to hell and the bad destinations is closed off, because one refrains from evil, only does what is good and really makes the mind pure. The door of the truth is opened, the mind is free because one can destroy the ego. One abandons the first 3 fetters, namely, personality view, doubt, and attachment to precepts and practices. At this point, the mind changes and comes to see and understand. Before, it was as if the ego was hiding by the door. But now, the watcher keeps a watch over the door. As soon as the ego appears, it is discovered and the ego falls apart because it can't endure verification. It could be compared to a tree that has fruit. As soon as one shakes it a bit, some fruits will fall down. And in the same way, greed, hatred, and delusion, and those three fetters that are deeply instinctive and are conditions, that arise from the body and the mind, drop off and disappear. The mind that changes into a noble one, is the superior mind that is able to destroy the ego. When one experiences this, the ego drops off and is finished with. It is as if wholesomeness and unwholesomeness, or dirtiness and cleanliness are separated. Being a noble one is to have this kind of excellent mind. This is how the mind changes. It is not a matter of changing clothes, or changing one's words. It is not a matter of ordaining, using this or that ceremony. That is just convention, that is being a monk through convention. But when one is a noble individual, one is far removed from suffering and defilement. Suffering and defilement are the enemies of life. The ego with its attachment is an enemy of life, because wherever there is ego, it is like having stains of losing, of winning, of happiness, of suffering, of getting, of losing, etc. When one can relinquish the ego, it is like having a dilapidated car that gets fixed up, and restored to its normal condition. The body and the mind are the same. The path of Dhamma takes us to this point. It is the excellent path, it is number one, it is the superb path of life. When reaching this point, one experiences what it is to be a noble one. The mind that makes this shift, is a diamond of Dhamma, it is the doorway to truth. As we chant in the evenings, the Sangha that is born from the good Dhamma, is endowed with such virtuous qualities as practicing well. Being born from the good Dhamma, is right here, the noble Sangha is born right here, it is born from developing awareness, until one reaches the very state of watching and seeing, and on seeing not being caught up. This state of watching is the path, it is the spiritual life. If one compares it with the road, it is a smooth highway. Lust, irritation, conceit, and attachment to views and opinions, that one used to have and was caught up in, dry up. Comparable to fruits that are, all shriveled up, still in the tree. Purity arises, it is high sila, high samadhi and high panyat. It is the aggregate of virtue, firmness of mind and wisdom, and they get better all the time. The body doesn't do anything bad, speech doesn't say anything bad, and the mind doesn't think anything bad. One is separated from evil and one gets further and further removed from enemies. Suppose, before, we were driving very slowly along a bumpy road full of holes. As soon as we get to the smooth highway, we can drive at ease and we don't get stuck, we can keep going. One becomes skilled at being in the state of watching, seeing because of watching, and on seeing not being drawn in, it becomes more and more an art. Whatever one does, if one is an artist, one can do it excellently. For example, a painter who uses just a single pen or a single brush. He or she is able to fluently produce an image of a mountain. It is a magical thing that improves continuously. I try to bring up comparisons through using convention, because the truth is sometimes hard to put into words. When the state arises where there is supreme virtue, firmness of mind and wisdom, the supreme spiritual life and supreme purity, one abandons the various things that used to intervene, both in the body and the mind, it changes altogether. Whatever passes, whatever one experiences, one really knows and sees it for oneself. It is like when we finish something, we know that it is finished. One reflects on the Dhamma that one knows and sees and liberated one. How did it arise? There is more and more a sense of separation and reflection, happiness and joy arise. It is comparable to being pulled along by a current, going to the sea, one doesn't have to make any effort. Or it is like a strong man, he is able to lift up weights immediately. It is the same with the paths and fruits of practice, from the first stage of enlightenment upwards. It is smooth and refined. This can destroy the ego, and the defilements starve. At this stage, no perception arises and there is no deluded identification. It feels like it's hard to think and get carried away. To go back and think in ways that make one be something or other, makes one's hair stand on end. Anyway, neither the mind nor the body would be caught up in it. The corruptions of mind shrink back. One can no longer think like that. Old perceptions have disappeared. It is as if one is born anew. Having arrived at this point, it seems as if the ego is gone. There is nobody left. The self has been burned up by knowledge. It is like shriveling up. It is the ending of all perception. The mind is free. It is as if a state arises that is parted and disconnected. It looks vague and indistinct. The five aggregates that one used to cling to, that were the germ, now don't get anything to eat and so they starved and a separation takes place. Before, form, feeling, perception, volition and consciousness would work together, but they would each have their own function. Now, they dried up, everything shriveled up, as if they had become loose and come apart. Sometimes I would still be deluded enough to connect them, but they wouldn't hold together. Even when connected, there were only just processes. All speech and all thoughts were purely just processes only. It was the end of proliferation in life, the finish of craving and attachment. When reaching this state, one knows that the paths, the fruits of practice and nibbana, really do exist. One knows that non-birth, non-aging, non-sickness, and non-death, really do exist. Luangpor Teean knew this matter, right at this point. The Buddha, the Dhamma, the Noble Sangha, the paths, the fruits, and nibbana, really exist. We are really able to be liberated in this lifetime. Teaching people to know this matter, can be taken to be the greatest thing in the life of human beings. It is better to teach people to reach this final goal than to teach generosity, because this leads to the end of suffering, the end of being. This is the most excellent thing. If this state arises, then help to support this teaching. If there is nobody to talk about it, there won't be anybody to listen to it, and the Dhamma will completely disappear. I consider talking about the truth to be my profession. When one takes the truth as one's profession, one has to talk. If nobody shows people how to practice, it will be the end of the truth. If you are interested to study and practice, I will arrange food and a convenient enough place, a hut or a meditation hall for you to use, so you can try out training yourself. Before, I used to live out in the country, far from civilization. When many people would come to practice, there would be a problem. Sometimes there would be a deficiency of things, which would make it inconvenient for the practitioners. But at present, I have a place, and if you're interested, I will look after things. I will be your friend as far as I can. We will share happiness and suffering. Don't suffer by yourself. I'm sure that I won't lead you along the wrong path, because I have discovered the path to some extent. When seeing suffering, one discovers suffering. When seeing something that is wrong, one overcomes what is wrong, and when one discovers the path, one can reach the final destination. No matter whether you are ordained as a monk or not, I have a place prepared for you. If you have suffering, don't do anything else. I really have found the way out. It is the number one way. Reflect on this, but you shouldn't just use reasoning. You shouldn't create conflicts or just have blind faith. Don't be averse to anything. These words are just words. Once they have been received, they might disappear, but if you're interested, try out to practice. If you read these words and immediately confidence arises, it is not right. First, practice. If, having practiced, results arise, then be confident. If, having practiced, there are no results, then find another method. Meditation is something that has to be tried out through practice. When one experiences it by oneself, one's actions will sort things out. or destine the course of one's life, by themselves. It is not a matter of figuring things out or memorizing, one must put things into practice and one must experience things for oneself. Being aware is to develop the four foundations of awareness. Anybody who turns up the hand or makes other movements, and is aware of it, is practicing in the right way, because awareness is the sprout of enlightenment, that is, it makes wisdom spring up. One must start up from this point of making use of movements. It really is the birthplace of the four foundations of awareness. This really is the excellent path. It is called, Agamagko Visuddhya, the excellent path for purification. Buddha arises from building up a lot of awareness. One has to do that oneself and practice oneself. The method of developing awareness, as Luangpor Teean teaches, is really up to date. The more diligent one is in building up awareness, the more one knows, sees, and understands one's life. Awareness is with us all, as long as we have a body and a mind. To have awareness is the treasure of a human being. It is the same for all of us, without exception. No matter what country you live in, what nationality you may have, or what language you may speak. Be aware, just raising the arm, feeling it, is already good enough. Guidance to train oneself. We must use our lives to train ourselves diligently. We must take ourselves to the ultimate and final goal. This is called an excellent life. If we don't train ourselves, it is easy to get involved in things. For example, if there is suffering, we suffer until we die. So we have to train diligently in order to overcome doubt, worry, sadness, anger, desire, delusion, etc. This is called following a good example. The characteristics of our thoughts are the same, they don't differ much. Whatever one is familiar with, one thinks about that, following our disposition and character. The environment has an influence on our lives. For example, someone is born in a good family but the environment is no good, and it gives that person information that is no good. The result is that that person receives bad information. A bad past leads life to delusion and bad actions. This is a law of nature. There are certain states of mind that we shouldn't surrender to, such as doubt and worry, because we still have a way out. Try to reflect on the examples that good people set. The Buddha, for instance, he is the founder of a religion, the enlightened one, the one who clearly understands the world. We should study his example, so that we will understand why the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, religion, merit, heaven, and Nibbana, really do exist. If we still have doubt about this, it means that we still have suffering. We must understand these matters clearly and go beyond doubt. If one still tries to figure these things out, still doubts and worries, one still suffers. These things should be understood clearly and doubt should be done with, because there are teachers that can teach us how to know and see these things. In the past, I heard that Luangpor Teean Jidasubho was a teacher who taught how to clearly understand merit and evil, heaven and hell, and the paths and fruits of practice. Since I had doubts about practice, I went to study with him. When I first set out to practice, I still held on to views and opinions, and didn't accept certain things that Luangpor taught. I would use reasoning to contradict his teachings, and consequently like and dislike would arise. These things are hindrances that prevent knowledge and understanding from arising in practice. Therefore, when a teacher gives advice, one should first study and try it out through practice. Luangpor Teean taught me to develop awareness, which I had never come across or seen before. He taught me to have sati, and to be diligent in building up lots of awareness. Awareness, as I had learned it as a child, and at the time that I was studying the Dhamma, meant to recollect. I had trained in awareness with other methods, for example the kind of meditation where one sits with eyes closed and recites a mantra, in order to make the mind peaceful. I used to do it that way. Everybody seemed to be teaching like that, to sit with the back so straight that one starts to sweat and one gets backaches. Some people are very serious and force themselves. That's the way that I used to do it. I trained in this until the mind became peaceful, and happiness arose which was pleasant. When I trained with Luangpor Teean, he taught me to be aware and not to go for peacefulness. He taught not to control thoughts but to just know indifferently, which was certainly a strange way of teaching. Before I could catch the awareness in practicing, there were definitely many things that snared me. Sometimes, I fell back to my old practices, and as soon as I would raise my arms to do the rhythmic meditation, I would go back to being peaceful and stay with happiness, because that was more convenient than diligently knowing. An old man of over 70 practiced together with us. He advised me not to just sit there being peaceful, because that is not useful at all, but rather, to be diligent in building up the quality of knowing, to be aware while making movements. He kept guiding and looking after me. In the end I asked myself, what's the point of being fooled by thoughts? That's just an old habit. Let's train and be diligent in building up the quality of knowing. One has to control oneself by determining that, if I get lost in proliferating thoughts, I will try to be aware by making use of objects to know, such as movements of the hands. As soon as one turns up the hand, one really feels it, one really sees it by oneself. Whenever the hands move, one is aware. When one can catch the feeling of moving more and more often, proliferation gradually diminishes. In this way, I got a foundation and really saw results. Previously, I used to think about the future and the past, but now concoction would stop on seeing thought, and I would stay with the present, stay with the movements. One really knows the movement of turning up the hand, one doesn't have to wait for even a second. One knows again and again, one really knows many times. When there is truly a lot of knowing, one becomes diligent in building up the quality of knowing continuously, just as when one keeps diligently working and gets lots of work done. So, if one really catches the quality of knowing, and one is really diligent in building it up, one gets plenty of knowing. It is useful to have lots of knowing, because whenever one gets lost in thoughts, going all the way into the past or the future, the quality of knowing pulls one back, so that one doesn't easily flow with thought. Whenever one is swept away with proliferating thoughts, one immediately comes back, one is really able to come back. We're able to train and give rise to the quality of knowing in the various postures, for example, while doing walking meditation, or making movements with the arms. Whatever you take hold of, know it. The breathing, know it. Just have only this quality of knowing, and you will have a foundation. Before, I used to stay with the breathing. I would recite a mantra and seek peace, I would force myself to be peaceful. It is useful to practice like that because one gets peaceful and understands what peace is. But when I reached this state of knowing, I understood that the state of being aware and awake is something different from peace altogether. Awareness gives rise to knowing, one doesn't stay with peace. When we blink our eyes, we can know, when we swallow saliva, we can know, moving a finger, we can know, breathing, we can know. Whenever we touch something, we can know. These are examples. Therefore, creating this quality of knowing is a kind of art. It can be created in all postures and movements. All it takes is that one puts forth effort to know what's happening within one's body. It is comparable to having a set of tools that one uses to build up lots and lots of knowing. If one does it in the right way, diligence arises. There is an old saying that says that it is as easy as rolling a boulder downhill. But if one doesn't do it in the right way, it is as hard as rolling a boulder uphill. When one does it right, one gets a foundation and one becomes diligent to practice and build up awareness, without anybody having to tell one, one tells oneself and creates plenty of knowing. One becomes diligent to know in using one's daily life, always trying to find ways to be aware. Even though at times people or friends cause us to get lost, we make effort to avoid that. We are careful to take the chance, to know for ourselves the things that arouse knowing. Nobody has to tell us. It's like working, when we do it right we are diligent and fluent, but if we don't do it right it's like banging our head against a brick wall. We know and see for ourselves what delusion is like and what knowing is like. We know and see what the advantages and disadvantages of knowing and delusion are. And so, we prevent and deal with things automatically. One has the answers oneself and doesn't have to ask anybody. If there is a lot of knowing and one knows for long periods of time, one will see the conditions of the body, because the quality of knowing is the one who watches the movements. However, this doesn't mean that one will see this immediately, because sometimes, as the body is moving, instead of just seeing the body, there are things that make us get lost, for example, feelings that arise due to unintentional thoughts, or various moods, either coming from the body or the mind. These things incite us to get lost, but we don't. These things are there, but now we have seen that they are just feelings. People who have trained in meditation before, will just meet with coarse feelings, and the refined feelings that exist in the body and the thinking mind, they won't see. If we build up the quality of knowing until it is the boss, it will be able to distinguish delusion from knowing, even though delusion, proliferation, was in charge before. We will be able to pass through subtle feelings without having to get involved. It compares with traveling and passing through various villages. We leave this and that town behind us, and pass through without getting involved. But someone who easily loses awareness, is incessantly interested in the thoughts that come up, reasoning in every way, and loses a lot of time by thinking. Like, dislike, and all the rest of it arise. This is someone who is not determined to walk the path. The Buddha said that, someone who is heedful is awake when others are asleep. Such a one leaves foolish people far behind, just as a well-trained horse leaves a horse without strength behind. Not getting involved with proliferating thoughts that arise is like this: one moment of knowing is to be removed one moment from not knowing, from delusion. One gets further and further removed and one becomes skilled in knowing. It is easy to know. Before, it was easy to get lost, but when one trains oneself it becomes easy to know. The feelings and the various thoughts that make the body move are nama dhamma. When the quality of knowing sees this, one understands the body. Before, the quality of knowing wasn't there yet, and one had not yet discovered that it is thought that orders the body around. One assumed that there was a self that was moving. But when one understands rupa and nama, one understands that rupa is something solid, composed of many things. One knows heat, cold, hunger, and pain, because of rupa. Nama is the mind, feelings and thoughts. It receives and knows all kinds of things. There are innumerable conditions that arise together with the mind. Anger, worry, desire, and delusion, are some examples of coarse ones. They make the mind run wild and it takes them to be self. Actually, they are not self, but one doesn't know that they are conditions of mind, and so one acts following them, until those various conditions give rise to a sense of self, of me, being like that. But when the knowing watches and sees them, one understands that they are only just conditionings of the mind, and one can let go. To sum up, the body that is alive is a lump that consists of two things, namely, rupa and nama. At this point one knows how to separate rupa from nama. And so one clearly realizes the relationship between rupa and nama. This may be called the arising of insight knowledge. It is a really clear realization. Reality doesn't deceive. This point can be taken as a universal standard. Teachers cannot deceive disciples, and disciples cannot deceive teachers about it. Whoever comes to this stage, no matter what nationality one has, or language one speaks, one will see like this. Having seen it, there is no more problem, no more doubt. One abandons and puts things down, right there. When we have our eyes open we can see all sorts of things. For example, we see that this is a rock, that is a tree, and that is a snake creeping over there. It's good to see. If we don't see it's dangerous, but when we see, we're safe. But seeing with the eyes can still be deceptive because it is not a realization. Realizations don't deceive, rather, they set one free. There is security in realizations. To see is to make an end of one's burden. When the quality of knowing sees rupa as a lump of suffering, It creates the feeling of having pity on the body, because the body doesn't know anything, it just does its duty. It gives us signals of what is dangerous, for example, heat and cold, so that we can do something about it. We didn't see this before, and so we thought that I am hot and I am cold. But now we see Rupa and so we know how to solve the problem. The body is suffering already as it is just a lump of suffering. One has to breathe, has to swallow saliva, has to blink the eyes, has to stand, has to lie down, has to eat, has to go to the toilet, etc. When we give it more work to do, such as smoking cigarettes, it is a burden for Rupa, we make it suffer even more. The mind is the same. When we're angry, we give the body suffering. This is oppression that works from both sides, from the side of the body as well as from the side of the mind. This kind of relationship between the body and the mind is not appropriate at all. When there is the knowing, or the state of watching, peace arises. And Rupa and Nama relate to each other in the right way. Before, I used to think that I didn't have suffering, because I didn't do anything bad, that was because I didn't know what suffering was. Whoever thinks like this can be taken to be crazy, crazy with self. So, in the past, I didn't understand myself. Likewise, having or being anything, as well believing one's own thinking, is dangerous because one understands that to think like that is good, and one doesn't see that there is any problem to be solved, one assumes that things are like this or like that. One knows through thought, one is through thought, one sees through thought, and one gets and attains through thought, when one is not in contact with the present. When we're faced with facts that contradict what we thought, we don't have a way out of suffering or out of our ideas, constructed in the past. If one knows the suffering of Rupa and Nama, one will understand that they are really lumps of suffering. Pain and sickness are conditions of the body, this is called the disease of the body. Anger, for example, is a condition of the mind, this is called the disease of the mind. When we don't know this, we cling to all kinds of things and create suffering in the mind, such as love, hatred, anger, desire, and delusion. When we wake up from the disease of body and mind, we see the suffering of Rupa and Nama. It is as if this quality of knowing opens the door, and we can see through. The knowing is like an eye. Before, we had our eyes closed and didn't see, there was only just getting caught up with all sorts of conditions. But now, the quality of seeing arises because there is knowing. This is called training oneself. This is the way that I have trained myself. It is really the guideline for people. It makes one see the convention of body and mind, for instance fame, possessions, money, children, husband, wife, land, etc. The world is full of physical and mental objects that are convention, inside as well as outside. One sees this penetratingly. It is as if the power of wisdom knowledge sees that these things are conventions of Rupa and Nama, diseases of Rupa and Nama, Rupa Dhamma and Nama Dhamma. Before, we didn't see these states, and so we got caught up in all kinds of conditions. Knowing convention makes one feel light. In the past, I used to go for all sorts of things, superstition, verses, chants, and I believed in rituals. On performing some of them fear would arise, others would make me bold, doubtful, happy, or sad. I ended up with nothing because it's all nothing but convention. A thing is sometimes assumed to be likable and sometimes not likable, it can change, and we go for it all. When I came to see Rupa Nama and convention, I felt light. It is not like ordinary seeing, but when one sees, suffering disappears. The gross kind of suffering, such as suffering that comes from foolishness, delusion, and stupidity, really disappears. It compares to having finished one's studies, one is able to read and write, doesn't get stuck, has enough knowledge and is able to stand on one's own feet. What I'm talking about is a universal standard, it is a fixed formula, just like mathematical formulas, 2 multiplied by 5 is equal to 10, not 11. When all this knowledge arises, one knows what other people are saying, one knows the objects that one looks at, there is just knowing and joy. It is insight, because one now has the eye that sees the Dhamma. It is fun to watch, whatever one looks at, one hits it on the spot. Both material and mental phenomena, inside as well as outside. Whatever happens to the body and the mind, one knows immediately, and one leaves it behind without hesitation. Before, when something would come in contact with the mind would ripple. Now the mind doesn't ripple, rather, the object that comes into contact with the mind is set free. When I was still a layman, I went to practice Dhamma at the Budayana forest, in Loei province. I had to use a wooden platform from a nearby monastery, and I bought a plastic sheet to make a roof. Tattered monks' robes were used as walls, because in July there is plenty of rain. As I was practicing, somebody told me that I should understand Rupa Nama, because he saw me practicing for a long time without understanding it. Some people said that they knew, just practicing for a week, and they knew Rupa Nama. But I practiced for 2 whole weeks and still didn't know it. I thought to myself, I really have to see it in my mind, I'm not going to just remember others' words or figure it out with my own thinking. That's how Luangpor Teean taught, he taught to practice and see it for oneself. Next, I thought, Luangpor Teean used to say that he had made large offerings to the monastery, including building a ceremonial hall, all by himself. But I am a poor man, I didn't do all that. I probably don't have a chance to realize the Dhamma. These thoughts made me feel inferior and doubtful. Then I thought, but I've done some good things, maybe not as much as him, but I've made merit, built a monk's hut, and I am not a bad person, I don't have any stains of wickedness. I've always been virtuous because my parents are Buddhists and taught me to do what is good, and that's what I've been doing all the time. Especially when I studied superstition, I had to keep precepts, I couldn't gamble. My character was like this. Reflecting like this, made me a bit proud of my past because I was not an evil person, but why didn't I know the Dhamma? I asked Luangpor Teean, are there any practitioners who don't get any knowledge after having practiced? Luangpor Teean said, that has never happened. It seems that I am the first one, because after 2 weeks I still don't know anything, I remarked. Luangpor Teean walked up to me and grabbed my hand. I said, you have made merit and made offerings, but I have never done as much of that as you, I guess I don't have the merit to know. He answered, never mind, don't worry. Are you practicing sincerely? I said, I really am, Luangpor. Luangpor Teean said, practice here for 1 month. How much money do you get for 1 month's work? I answered, I get 1,000 baht a month. In those days I was a hired hand, making doors and windows for houses. This was building work, skilled labor, and I would get at least 1,000 baht a month. Next he said, if you practice for 1 month and you don't get any knowledge, I will give you 1,000 baht, I really promise you that. But you have to practice sincerely. From then on, I was energized in practicing. Practicing in those days, I would sometimes get lost in criticizing certain monks, thinking that they didn't have the same virtue as me, because I saw them playing and joking. Sometimes, they told me to go and look for bamboo shoots or to climb a tree and collect fruits. I asked myself, is this called practicing Dhamma? It made me think about leaving. But having reprimanded them in my mind, I no longer looked at others. Instead, I only watched and listened to Luangpor Teean. I didn't pay attention to others and create a mess and a burden for myself. So, I made a firm resolution to build up awareness, to build up sati. After practicing Dhamma for less than 20 days, I had an experience and lots of knowledge arose. When practicing in the right way, it becomes as easy as rolling a boulder downhill. But when doing it wrong, it is like rolling it uphill. Doing it in the wrong way is just a burden, there are many things that one doesn't like, and then one goes and thinks about them. One is thinking, reasoning, liking and disliking like a madman, and this makes one not attain the Dhamma. Building up the quality of knowing, or awareness, is not something one can think up, rather, one has to practice in order to know. In the past I had been an occult healer, and had verses and chants. When I built up the quality of knowing, that stuff just dropped off. I didn't do anything about it, I wasn't the slightest bit reluctant to give it up. There was no more foolishness, delusion, attachment to rituals, and playing around with witchcraft and sorcery in my mind, from that moment onwards. I used to think that I was a magician, able to heal the sick. An invulnerability chant has to be recited until one feels that one's body swells up, and becomes so big that it squeezes against the walls, or until one perceives a razor blade as a blade of grass. Then one has reached the end of the recitation. To do this well, one has to recite often. Magic chants depend on recitation, they depend on training in psychic powers. Sometimes I would chase off ghosts, I would cut off their heads with a sword, making a loud sound. I've done that for many people. When I built up the quality of knowing, I stopped doing all that stuff. One day as I was practicing, Luangpor Teean came walking over and asked how I was doing. I answered him without being afraid of anything, I know Rupa Nama now. Luangpor Teean said, if you get understanding from practicing in this way, then do more of it. Try to keep up with thought, watching it. This refers to unintentional or sneaky thoughts. If no thoughts occur, then watch the movements of the body. Whenever thoughts arise, be in time to watch. Luangpor taught me to work with the mind, to watch both the body and the mind with awareness, to watch and see suffering, suffering of Rupa and of Nama, to watch and see physical and mental phenomena, and convention of Rupa and Nama. When proliferation arises, one shouldn't give it priority. One should do one's duty of watching the movements of the body and the thoughts in the mind. One shouldn't give attention to thoughts that come up by themselves. Build up awareness that is in time with the thoughts arising. When one knows the thoughts in time, one doesn't incline to go with the arisen thoughts. So, it is our duty to build up awareness. When one builds up more and more awareness, in the end it suddenly meets up with thought. It is as if one opens the door and collides with thought. At the moment a thought is about to come up, we are lying in wait at the door. As soon as the thought arises, whack, we know it in time. It's like a surprise, and the thought fails to establish itself. This makes one see how wild concoction is, sneak thoughts, and it makes one see the origin of suffering. This is not like ordinary knowledge, it appears in an electrifying flash. I definitely have seen thought clearly. Before, we got carried away with thoughts, sankhara, which are the cause of suffering. We wandered here and there with thought, and we got lost in it. One is not free because of thought. To give an example, a thought arises and one becomes afraid, one starts to think about something and one proliferates defilement and craving. We didn't see this clearly before. When I came to practice with Luangpor Teean, I clearly saw how bad mental formations are. It's like a dog chasing a deer, we were able to follow and keep up with the things that deceived. It is comparable to somebody who plays tricks, they have fun in deceiving people, but as soon as we see what they're doing, and we keep up with their tricks, we then know that it is nothing at all. They really can't deceive anyone who realizes what is going on. There are two kinds of thinking, namely, first, unintentional thinking. This is illusion, it makes one get lost, on thinking one is led along the wrong path. Second, intentional thinking, never mind about that, one deliberately thinks about something well, one makes use of thought and having finished thinking, that's the end of it. Intentional thinking is crystal clear, it makes one understand merit, demerit, and the nether realms, one experiences these things clearly. I can 100% guarantee that, by understanding like this, one closes the door to the lower realms. One can be said to be a human being. In the past I was still just a person, because I didn't see convention, I didn't see Rupa Nama. But when I could keep up with thought, I stopped being merely a person. I had more happiness than before, I no longer played about like before, it was as if I had reached the shore, to some extent. If one compares it to a trader, I was a trader in diamonds and got heaps of money. Previously, I was like a trader in kapok or fiber crops. What a mess, what a hassle. And I got only a little money, a little happiness and a little merit. I thought I would get merit from others or from doing this or that, just mind stuff. There is a shift that takes place in the mind on seeing thought. To go and proliferate as before makes one's hair stand on end. To see thought helps one to behave differently than before. I really saw it crystal clear. To suddenly meet up with thought makes an end to coarse behavior. Everything that is unjust disappears. It is like bowling, the pins all tumble over, one after the other. Suffering is comparable to fruits up in a tree. When we shake the tree just a little, the fruits fall down, but not all of them. Foolishness, crude forms of suffering and anger, desire and delusion are affected, but not a lot, they are just shaken up a bit. Being a human being means to be someone with virtue. When there is virtue, there is normality, there is peace.
May all beings be at ease, whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born. May all beings be at ease.